the Yardbirds were one of them.
The string of hit singles that they had were quite remarkable. The kind of pop record there was no real precedent for at that time.
I mean, people say that, yeah, like Elvis, there was nothing like him, but there was nothing like the Yardbirds.
Whoa, Louise, why don't you hurry?
They've ended up as footnotes in an awful lot of stories. There's the launchpad for Led Zeppelin story, there's the finishing school for guitar heroes story.
Clapton was very precious when he was a young man. Precious in the way that some people that get into jazz and blues are, where they get rather kind of snobbish and elitist.
Well, I took an instant dislike to him. Actually, he seemed to be, you know, quite cocky, and that's sort of character I don't really like.
Now Louise ain't good looking, and her hair ain't red, but she cooks my breakfast, brings it to my bed. Whoa, Louise, why don't you hurry home? You know I ain't never had no good loving.
I had a pretty strange sort of childhood, but so did thousands of other people, especially after the war. You know, there was all kinds of illegitimate situations with kids and things, and breaking up of homes, and I wasn't really, you know, alone in that, but I was singled out to pick up the guitar.
Knowing about Eric's history and his family life and all that, then it all makes a lot of sense. To spend a week rehearsing a two-note lick on a guitar, all that drive, I'm pretty certain that a lot of it, you know, stemmed from family background.
Eric Clapton was vital to the early success of the Yardbirds because he was like a prodigy. He was the main reason people went to see them.
Why don't you hurry?
I suppose I was going to folk clubs, as many people were when I was a kid. But the blues just seemed to be a better extension of that somehow. It had more bite.
I mean, our dilemma was that we couldn't make major chart success with the sort of blues material and the blues arrangements that we were doing.
Everybody tried so hard to turn those blues songs into English hit parade things, because nobody wanted to betray the cause.
I know Eric has always professed to be a purist, and he certainly was at that time.
I mean, he left the Yardbirds, so he says, because For Your Love was not what he believed to be in the strict blues tradition of what he wanted to play. I mean, I just think that's incredibly smug.
Eric's thing was, you know, it was the blues, it was that emotion through the guitar.
And he had ideas for other songs as covers, which weren't really single material.
But he really was the only one who didn't want to progress.
Maybe if I was sort of black and lived in the deep south, he might have thought it was okay, but I was white, Jewish, from Manchester.
I mean, okay, it wasn't strictly the Yardbirds as we had been playing, but it certainly, that time, was the sort of directions that we wanted to go in. Remember, but it seems to me almost seconds after the recording, he you know, decided he was not going to be in the band anymore.
And so when the news came, I went to see Jimmy Page immediately, and I said, Jimmy, you know, we've got a problem.
I think Giorgio did ask him, when Eric left, he asked Jimmy to join us.
He declined because he was, I mean, it was comfortable. He was doing session work.
I was doing about 3 studio dates a day, and you could say a good 5 days a week, and then maybe a couple over the weekend.
But he recommended a guitar player called Jeff Beck.
I remember being at Jimmy Page's when I mean, we were great friends, always sort of playing records to one another. He said, "What do you think of this?" And he put on 5 Live Yardbirds album. He'd already backed out of the job, and I think he was sort of scout to find a replacement for Eric.
We didn't audition him or anything. We just had a run through in the afternoon. And he had this sort of long hair and he was, you know, he looked really rough.
I was bad. I had, the hair was probably a bit longer down there and spots. I had terrible spots.
Chris took him round to Carnaby Street and buy him some clothes and get his hair styled and make him into a semi-pop star. He was perfect actually for the band because he could play all Eric's stuff.
One person shouting out, "Where's Eric?" And I said, "He's gone. Didn't you hear? Read the papers, he's left."
But he had this very futuristic feeling about his playing.
I was very, very, very happy with Jeff because he had this emotional thing, you know, that Eric didn't have. Eric was very elegant, but the emotion is there with Eric, but it's not exploding, you know. With Jeff, it was just exploding. So that's exactly what we need, you know.
A bit like having a, you know, having your own synthesizer on tap. It was that good, you know.
I remember one gig we finished. I'd just done this nonsensical feedback, you know, as part of the act, and like I used to wang around with the string and all that. And this guy grabbed me afterwards and he said, "You know those funny noises, that feedback?" He said, "You want to keep that? That's great. Keep it in the act." That was so precious about the marquee that most of the people there were there to see the nuts and bolts of the blues and all that. And it's only when we went and played these dumb-ass places in Wick, you know, and Dumfries, they would go, "Keith, you're great!"
I wouldn't say he was a great singer as such, but he certainly knew how to put a song across. I mean, he was able to just put something over and you understood it and thought, well, you couldn't do it better.
He was a punk rock singer. It's just that punk rock hadn't been invented at the time and everyone just thought he sounded weedy, flat, whiny and out of tune.
Just give her my message. Tell her on my feet. And I know when she had me back again. Oh, I will never make her sad.
Keith didn't have such a great voice, and Keith had a problem. He had just like he was very asthmatic,
puffing away on his inhaler. Bless him, you know, all the time. Or a can of beer. That's all you heard in the back of the truck was.
We just couldn't understand how he was able to do it. I mean, because it takes a lot of air and energy to blow into a harmonica and suck back in and make all these bent notes and everything.
Hey, pretty women standing around, make love to you, baby, one outside.
I was too ferocious a taskmaster, but I knew from my experience that you have to hit the iron while it's hot, leap ahead, establish a fortified position, and then take it easy. We hadn't been there yet, you know. We hadn't had enough hits, we hadn't done enough things.
There was one occasion specifically that I can remember when he had collapsed lung, and he was being pushed to go on by Giorgio, and he was going, "Come on, baby, you've got to get out there, you've got to do this," and he was just incapable of it.
But he was good. I mean, I thought he was a great singer and great harp player and had great ideas, and he was good on stage. If he was sober, he was...
Whether his drinking was to do with the fact that he was losing confidence or he was drowning something, I don't know, but at times it did make his performance suffer.
I hadn't ever travelled until I met the Yardbirds. I didn't even have a passport. So, you know, how can I ever complain about anything, you know? I mean, it was like a passport to the world, you know.
We'd obviously charted in America with For Your Love. So, you know, and there was that big British invasion.
On this ridiculous exchange basis that we were on at the time. If the act that was sent to England in our exchange didn't get a gig, and we didn't get the gig, or some crap like that, and a man would come around with a suit and a briefcase saying, "You're not going to be playing tonight, boys," I remember sitting many hours in the dressing room going, are we or are we not playing?
Giorgio essentially was the sixth member of the Yardbirds. I mean, he was an artist, he was a Russian, Italian, probably some other extraction in there somewhere.
He was all in the mind, Giorgio. It was all ideas for us and inspiration, but on the practical level, he was a bit missing.
To me, the Yardbirds were something very unique, and I knew exactly where they could have gone. You know, I had a plan in my head for them. They would still be going now. They'll still be going now, without looking ridiculous.
See the stars come falling down from the sky, gently passing, they kiss your tears when you cry.
They were I saw them like my younger brothers, you know. I mean, I wasn't that much older than they were, but I had a lot more experience, and I've always been on the artist side anyway.
He saw himself as a sixth member. I think he was probably hopeless with money.
I'm not a money-grabbing, greedy bastard, you know. I don't have $1 million in the bank. In fact, I have perhaps $3,000 in the bank. This has never been my major preoccupation, to accumulate a fortune on the back of others, you know.
As we were having hits and we were getting more successful, we started to talk and say, well, you know, we're not really getting much money.
The money wasn't really... I mean, the only time you get resentful is when you find out there's money been there, you've missed it. Quite understandably, I was getting pissed off with not knowing where the money was going.
You can accept little money to begin with, but when you've had quite some chart success and you've been touring for the last 2.5 years or whatever it is, and you're not getting any money, you start to think, well, something is going wrong here. You know?
For myself, my tears just fall into dust.
I remember one day we had a meeting about it, and he apparently was outside in a car waiting to see what had happened, and someone told him what we'd come up with, and he was very upset.
You're relieved as their manager. Wow, you know, this is after 3 years of working with this guy. So it took me a long time to recover from that one.
I'm sad.
But this time, because I had a contract, you know, I said, oh, thank God, you know.
We did sign a contract, certainly. I mean, he didn't make the mistake with us that he probably made with the Stones. I don't know exactly what happened, but I think contractually he'd never, you know, he'd obviously not done quite the right thing, and knowing Giorgio, I can well believe it. So they'd slipped through his fingers.
And what I wanted was the rights to all the things that I produced.
Yeah, Mister, you're a better man than I. Oh, Mister, you're a better man than I. Yeah,
We thought, oh well, he can have the rights. That was part of the deal. That went by very quickly.
Could you tell a wise man by the way he speaks or spells? Is this more important than the stories that he tells?
I don't think that we necessarily thought there was a future for it. You know, what, catalogue coming out 25, 30 years later, perpetually all around the world? Bad mistake.
yeah, Mister, you're a better man than I. Oh, Mister, you're a better man than I.
But it wasn't worth much for a long time, because it was like a whole period where, you know, who the hell was interested? So I was living on a couple of deals at CBS. I had with CBS for 3 years for $25,000, you know, for my stuff. So that's $7,000 a year. It's not exactly a fortune, you know.
Do you think that they think that you've done very well out of the Yardbirds back catalogue?
Perhaps. You know, Charlie Records has done well. I've had a couple of lawsuits on here, there, here and everywhere with people who, you know, I mean, it's a very piratic world out there, you know. I did honest deals because I had all the rights. I was not under any obligation to pay them any royalties. You know.
Things before my eyes just teach me to despise. Well, time make man go wise.
Rarely did two of us go off in a corner or go to an island and write songs and say, you know, it's a fait accompli. Here you are, guys, we're going to do this. It was all pretty much of a group thing.
Tomorrow will I be on
shapes of things was based on an old bass riff that I heard on a Dave Brubeck song, an old like jazz riff that Paul played on the bass. Jeff played just basically 2 chords through. Keith and Paul made the words, and then I had an idea for the middle.
I won't disgrace my God, to your passing hands.
Paul had a lot of talent in the studio. He knew how to handle us. He knew how to layer tracks. He had a lot of, you know, good musical direction. I mean, he was a very musical person.
Paul got earlier than the rest of us what happened to all of us. We had the stress factor.
In those days, a fairly prestigious gig was to be booked at one of the main colleges for their May ball.
There were all these people there like Jimmy Page and Graham Nash and Mama Cass.
Keith had started to drink. He'd got quite smashed. Well, actually, he got really smashed.
Paul particularly was really ashamed because Keith was totally wrecked.
We went and did the performance and literally had to, I think, tie him to the mic stand.
And was starting to play raspberries at the audience. It got really out of hand.
Which probably was pretty much the last straw for Paul, you know.
He had a lot of good ideas. It wasn't really until later on that he realised that that sort of side was missing. Yeah, it was a bit of a waste really, him leaving.
Jeff and I had spoken before about actually how good it would be if the 2 of us were in the same band, you know.
I think he felt at that time he'd done enough session work, been in studios for God knows how long. He wanted to get out and have a bit of fun on the road.
Jimmy took over on bass, and it was awful. He really wasn't a bass player. He didn't have the physical or you know, it just didn't have the right approach for bass at all.
Didn't last long. The transition came when Beck didn't turn up to a gig, which is something he did quite a lot. Page went on playing lead, and Chris Dreyer had to go on as the bass player. And when Beck came back, it was briefly a double lead guitar lineup.
Stereo lead guitars, harmonies and things. Yeah, it was really exciting stuff.
It was like having, you know, 2 gunslingers at each end of the stage, and they were sort of outdrawing each other the whole time.
It didn't work. It was pretty cacophony 90% of the time.
Oh, it did work. Absolutely, it was wonderful. I think you had to be. I think the only thing I could criticise a bit, when you're playing dual lead, they really have to remember what they're going to play. And I think Jimmy had the slightest edge there, in the fact that because of his discipline as a studio musician, he would remember it exactly.
I didn't like my territory being encroached upon. I wanted to be it, you know, I wanted to do all the guitar work.
I remember Timothy Leary coming to our concerts with a jar of LSD, you know, and you'd have to get a road manager to sort of check the Coke dispenser because they thought it was a favour if they spiked you. I mean, they thought we were really on acid, these guys.
In many ways, the Yardbirds should not only have survived psychedelia, but prospered from it. I mean, the first time the word psychedelic ever appeared in the British press was in a Melody Maker report from the States on one of their concerts in California, and they had to have a little asterisk and a footnote explaining what it meant.
I suppose we were the pioneers of that heavy metal thing and the psychedelia, because there was nothing like it.
Jeff had already done 3 or so, 4 years, whatever it was, and we had done a lot of American touring, grueling touring, you know, no chartered planes and limos, but Greyhound buses and domestic flights. It wasn't a life of luxury, so he was pretty frazzled, I reckon, Jeff.
Things just got on top of me and it's cracked up, you know, basically. I wanted to do something other than travel. I don't care what it was, just get it out of my hair, you know, all that travelling, and start and think about what I want to do.
And we'd left California to go on this tour, and Jeff did like 3 days of it and just said, oh God, I'm not having this, I've had enough of this. And he just bunked off and went back to his girlfriend in California.
They were very disillusioned with everything. You can imagine, I mean, going around America for 6 weeks on a bus, you know, doing all that, and you wind up with £112 each. You know? You bet your life they were disillusioned.
I'm dazed and confused. Is it stay, is it go? Give me a clue, 'cause I just want to know.
If you're touring the States in those days, you know, you needed somebody in your corner to deal with some of the mafia promoters and the day-to-day stuff that goes on it for a band, you know.
Promotions was not like it is today. It's a big legitimised business, you know, you never knew who you were dealing with.
He is a very hands-on manager, and when he represents an artist, I mean, you know, he would die for that artist.
I'm dazed and confused, I'm hanging on by a thread. I'm being abused, I'd be better off dead.
And I said, well, I've come for the $1,000 you owe me. And he said, you're not getting it. I said, well, you ain't leaving this caravan, pal, without you don't give me the $1,000. And he pulled this thing out and put this big revolver on there. He said, I'm going to shoot you. I said, I very much whether you were going to shoot me for $1,000. I said, don't be so fucking cheap.
For the first time in our career, we physically started to make money, you know. Yeah, I mean, from actually touring, that is.
You know, you've got to front them out. You've got to front them out without terribly being British and the right verbal. And it's what I call verbal violence, you know.
Is it confused? Is it stay? Is it go? I still love you, but I still want to know.
I mean, I just wish that he'd been a manager earlier, you know. It would have been probably a different story.
Before the last tour, we didn't want to do it anymore. We didn't want to be under that pressure anymore. It's like relentless every night, and we were out of control.
The Yardbirds, I think, fell apart because they all wanted different things. I mean, there is no way that the kind of music that Ralph McCarthy wanted to make and the kind of music that Jimmy Page wanted to make could have continued in the same group.
They were sort of longing for sort of, you know, sort of more mystical, waterfall type of music, you know. And here we were, sort of embryo Led Zeppelin.
I came up with a lot of riffs and ideas, and when the band finally folded and they wanted to try something new, I had this great stockpile of material in my mind.
He very much wanted to progress the Yardbirds musically. Nothing with the violin, but I mean, Jimmy was doing that in the Yardbirds, you know. But you know, there's no good flogging a dead horse. It had run its course. The Yardbirds had run its course.
A horrendous, stupid, pointless accident. He was all plugged in, earphones on, playing the guitar, composing, and he wasn't earthed. It wasn't that the electrics weren't earthed, and he'd stepped back onto a gas pipe for a gas fire and just made a circuit. It just killed him.